organization made up of lawyers and criminal investigators that were dealing with this human rights abuse. And they said, man, if you really want to get an education and understand what this is and what to do about it, you should see it firsthand. They invited us to one of their operating centers in Southeast Asia. We went with them, and this was probably the most unforgettable experience of my life. In that basically these guys, the investigators, pose as customers. They have undercover surveillance equipment on. They go in undercover into these places where children are being sold like commodities. They gather enough evidence. They actually have to do a separate investigation of local law enforcement to weed out those that are corrupt, those that are being paid by traffickers or whatever, and that's actually an interesting thing in and of itself. When they find those within law enforcement that are sympathetic to getting kids out of these horrific situations, the law enforcement will come in, extract kids from these situations, and hopefully the process of law doesn't always happen the way we would like to see it happen, but that process of law kicks in and these places are shut down. Traffickers are arrested. In fact, literally tonight, just a few hours ago, I just received word that a notorious trafficker in one of the countries that we work in, who was responsible for several of the children in our care, was just arrested. And so that was actually good news, and will probably get a very, very long time in prison. So these criminal investigators invited us in on one of these investigations on this particular night. They had been investigating this particular brothel for some time. They gave us this brief training on how to pose as a customer. And it was probably the most horrific experience of my life, having to pretend to be the very thing that everything in me is completely and utterly repulsed by. And I remember right before we went in, the last thing this investigator said to us, he says, look, if you don't think you can hold it together, don't come in with us, because if you freak out or do something stupid in there, it could destroy this investigation that has been taking a long time to process. And so we were like, no worries, until we walked into this brothel. And I remember as I stood in this room, I found myself standing in this room looking through these glass windows, looking at young girls with matching red dresses, having even the dignity of a name stripped from them. They just had numbers pinned to their dresses. And on this side of the glass, I'm standing shoulder to shoulder with what can only be described as predators who are purchasing these kids for sex. And I remember the thing that so took my breath away was the looks in the eyes of these kids. You know, I have 6 kids of my own, and one of the few things that I've learned about children is that if there's anybody on the planet that should have a light on in their eyes, that should have life in their eyes, that sparkle that you see in children, should be kids. But that was completely stripped from these kids. They were like little robots. They were staring at these television sets with children's cartoons playing on these television sets, waiting to be purchased and abused. And they were completely and utterly shut down, just like little robots staring at this glass, except for one girl. And my guess was that she was probably new to the brothel because that light had not been taken from her yet. She was the only one not staring at the children's cartoons on the television set. She was staring at us through the glass. There was still this fight left in her eyes, still this light on in her eyes. I will never forget those eyes. I'll never forget that face. Oftentimes it's the last face I see at night when I close my eyes to go to sleep. And I will never forget her number. Her number was 146. And so even naming our organization, it's to remind us that this is not about a cause or an issue. This is about individual children. This is about real people. Sometimes I think we can keep an arm's distance from things if we just keep it in cause or issue realm. But when I'm looking through this glass, I'm thinking, my gosh, that looks like my daughter. And then the next thought is, wait a second, this is somebody's daughter. And it's not just something even that happens to girls. We have 2 homes right now that we have caring for boys who are also survivors of this horrific injustice. And so I remember hearing those words as I stood in that brothel, hearing those words of that investigator going through my head, if you don't think you can hold it together, because everything in me, as a man, as a father, as a human being, was not holding it together. Everything in me wanted to smash through the glass in that moment and try to scoop up as many of those kids as I could. Everything in me wanted to see how many of these guys could we take out in this room. All these thoughts. It's so funny. When I speak in different places, oftentimes I'll have guys come up to me afterwards. Oftentimes women will come up saying, man, can you adopt these children? I'd love to see if there's a way that we can, and like you heard Nicole share, man, get involved in foster care. Oftentimes we complain about existing systems and how terrible they are and everything like that. Well, then do something about it and get involved and be trained. There's some great training. Even some of the training that we're doing as an organization is training people on how to deal with some of these specific situations. But man, that sort of horror, the idea that even exists today, it can take your breath away. You know, one of the things that I want to leave you with in thinking about this issue, because it is such a dark issue. Oftentimes I tell people, man, I'm like the dinner guest from hell. You know, when you go out to dinner with people you've not met before and everything, and you get into or the guy on the plane that you just hate to sit next to, where people say, Nicole, you probably get this, right? Where it's just, so what is it that you do? And you're like, man, you don't want to know what I do, man. It's like, what's that? Yeah, exactly. It's sort of like the killer. And so, but here's the reality, is that in thinking about this issue, I want us to think about real human beings. We're talking about children. We're talking about real people. And I love, even Nicole mentioned it earlier, and I love that, where she says, man, they're just like teenagers, regular kids. I had a woman with me one time visiting one of our safe homes in the Philippines. And we spent the day there, and we're playing badminton, and the kids are just whooping us in badminton, and they're running around, they're laughing, we're playing games and everything. And at one point, this person that was with me looks at me, she goes, Rob, these are just like real children. And I'm like, yeah, because they are real children. We're talking about real children. We're not talking. So when you've come out tonight, please understand that tonight is not just about awesome cakes. It's not about a horrific and dark issue that we're afraid to talk about and everything. We're talking about real children.